Welcome to Field Talk, a Monitor Farm Scotland podcast. Join our host, Wallace Curry, as he explores the stories from Monitor Farm networks on how farmers have adapted their businesses with support from specialists and experts to assess farm performance and explore opportunities. Monitor Farm Scotland is farmer-led, farmer-driven, encouraging discussion and solution-based thinking.
Welcome back, everyone, to Field Talk, the Monitor Farm podcast. Today is actually quite exciting. It's the last episode of the series. There is another series coming, so don't worry, and we'll cover that a wee bit later on in the episode. We'll tell you what's next for the Monitor Farm podcast. We have got a third series ready with a lot of good guests lined up already. The way this sort of works, and I say this at the start of most episodes, just to give a bit of background as to what's happening. The Monitor Farm program, or I guess the podcast covering the program, is the first series. So we speak to all the farmers in the first series, our 9 farmers across Scotland, and we also have like a sort of lambing special as well. Second series, which we're in now and just sort of tailing off at the minute, it's sort of looking at, I guess, some of the projects, some of the technology that's being utilised through the programme, whether that's been implemented on farms or some of the farms are sort of testing it to sort of put out further to the sector as a whole. So this is what this series is, and today's episode sort of focuses on the AHDB and QMS baselining project. So we're going to look at environmental baselining, what that means for you, what that means for your farm, and we've got 2 great guests on today. So we have Mary Vickers from the AHDB and we have Bruce McConaughey from QMS. Would you like to say hello?
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Or where are you based, Mary? Are you England or Scotland? Or
Yeah, well, I'm County Durham.
It'll be probably a wee bit toastier down there than it even is for us. What's always good with these sort of episodes, guys, is just for those that maybe don't know who you are, just a wee bit of background about who you are and what your role is with your company. So Mary, because you're first on my screen, we'll hear from you first, if that's okay.
Yes, so Mary Vickers, I am a Senior Environment Manager with AHDB. My role at the moment is managing the baselining pilot. Before that, I've done a number of roles within AHDB, some of those on the sort of livestock side, or as a beef scientist managing R&D portfolios for a while. Then I've sort of moved on to taking a more data-centric role and managed some sort of large data projects. So now this is moving into the environment sphere, but still data focused.
No, for sure. Very good. Very good. What about yourself, Bruce?
Yeah, so Bruce McConaughey, Head of Industry Development for QMS. My team works really pre-farm gate, working with producers on a pretty wide range of subject matter and topics, basically focused on improving productivity, profitability, resilience, and we cover a wide portfolio of work from genetics and antimicrobial use all the way through to carbon sequestration, which is obviously what we're going to chat through today to a degree.
It's probably became one of the biggest things in everything we talk about that was barely touched on 15 years ago. So it's been a quick learning curve for everyone. You guys are sort of working at the forefront of that, and it'll be quite interesting to hear as we go just sort of what impact that has on the sector as a whole, but also with a focus on the Monitor Farm programme itself. But just before we sort of go into Monitor Farm programme's work with this, Mary, I think you're best placed to answer this. What is environmental baselining? What is it? What's the concept we're talking about here today?
Okay, so baselining, I suppose, is a bit like benchmarking. You're trying to establish where you are on the farm today. And this is in terms of environmental benchmarks. So we're particularly interested in measuring carbon and some other measurements around environmental sustainability. And then having defined your baseline, then you can see, well, what can I do to improve various metrics and improve the sustainability of my farm, and then monitor that change over time.
Who does that discussion involve? You know, are you involving carbon calculators? Are you involving consultants? Who's involved in that? I assume it's quite a holistic process.
Yes, well, there's a lot of data capture involved. So across the board, initially what we've started to do is do a carbon audit. So that's using a carbon calculator, the same one across all the farms, to establish the emissions and to estimate carbon sequestration. But then we're also looking at LiDAR to estimate above ground carbon stocks and taking deep soil samples to measure soil organic carbon stocks as well. So there's a lot of data capture, and we hope to expand the kind of metrics that we monitor over time. But those are certainly what we've focused on this year 1 of the baselining pilot.
We've got yourself here, Mary, and yourself, Bruce, from AHDB and QMS respectively. What's the sort of collaboration been between QMS and AHDB, Bruce? And also, what's been the focus of the Monitor Farm programme with the focus on environmental baseline?
Yeah, so I mean, on the first point, the collaboration, and hopefully Mary agrees, I think it's been really good because, we're in a situation, I think you mentioned it earlier, where you said this isn't really something that was discussed 15 years ago. We're at a point now where we have the tools and we have the abilities to properly put data behind that discussion that's ongoing now. And we've been pretty good between, 15 years ago, the last decade, I think we've been pretty good at measuring emissions and what comes out of farm productivity. We've been less good as an industry at quantifying the positive benefits of this, whether it's ecosystem services or, understanding what environmental benefit our soil holds. So I think what's really exciting about this project and why we're all keen to pull in the same direction is that this is just the right time to do this, and it's achieving something that we've long been trying to achieve as agriculture. So I think there's a real opportunity for lots of collaboration across the industry beyond just QMS and AHDB and that.
Yeah, excellent. And the more we've done this podcast, the more I do whatever. I saw you very recently, Bruce. The more things that I see being successful is because there's more people coming from different angles. We're hearing different opinions, we're hearing different stories. That collaboration is so powerful no matter what we're doing. On the Monitor Farm side of things, is it across the board? Is it all 9 farms, or are you having a chat with maybe some and then expanding that as time goes on?
So it's not really a project that expands. We're trying to focus on the 170 farms that are taking part across the UK just now. The monitor farms that are involved are 2 monitor farms in a really interesting geographic area. So they're both in the northeast of Scotland, but very, very different as far as farm types, locations, altitudes, habitats. They're very diverse. So what we're getting is a really good snapshot of those 2 businesses and how they feed into the wider tapestry of the 35 farms we have in Scotland, 22 of which are, red meat species, and the 170 across the UK. So we'll get a really good sample from them. The reason not all 9 farms are taking part is because, as you well know, Wallace, that a lot of the monitor farms are very busy people, and this is something that just fit nicely with those 2 monitor farms, which is why they're taking part. But it's been a great opportunity to really spread the information that's going to come out of the baselining work through the industry via the monitor farm programme, amongst other things.
You're absolutely right. I mean, every time, so we interviewed them in the first series, as you know, and as I said, every time I speak to someone in this series, I'm like, when did they fit this part in? if they fit in this part in, it's pretty impressive. Mary, you touched on some of the kit being used, such as sort of carbon calculators, LiDAR. For those that don't know, i.e. myself, and I'm sure a few listening, what are these tools? How are they being utilised? And is that differing across farms, or are you trying to implement it similarly across?
Yeah, well, we're definitely trying to keep it consistent across all the farms. That's really important because not only do we want to monitor change within a farm over time, but between the farms, look at trends and what works and what doesn't work and all those kind of things. So there's a lot of value in having that range of land use and enterprises and farm types in the wider 170 farms that we're working with. So yeah, LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging, and what it is a light laser beam that is emitted from a piece of kit on either a drone or an aeroplane, which flies over the farm in very prescribed lines. And this laser is sent down to the ground. It bounces on whatever it hits. Maybe that's the ground, maybe that's a tree branch or a shed roof, or whatever it hits, it bounces back. And the time it takes to bounce back and return to the sensor is used to calculate the distance that that object is from the plane. And having done that, you can actually produce a 3D model of the landscape. So we produce a 3D model of the landscape. Then there's some clever programming that goes on to identify whether it's a shed on that landscape, or is it a tree, is it a hedge, is it a wall, whatever it is. And what we want to try and identify is the woody biomass. So woody biomass is trees, hedges, scrub, that kind of thing. Within that, there is a permanent store of carbon. And that's what we're trying to estimate the volume of it in the first instance, and then estimate the carbon in that, because some types of trees have different amounts of carbon in, grow at different rates, and various other things. So trying to be quite accurate in identifying that woody biomass is important. We can also estimate the carbon in the roots of those trees and hedges as well. So it's a novel technology, I guess, for giving us that data, which, before now, we haven't really had the chance to kind of monitor on a large scale across farms. So that's what LiDAR does for us. And then in terms of soil sampling, it's about using, I think it's a 36 mil core that is drilled down into the ground. And from that, you get hopefully 4 different samples of soil. Ideally, we go down to a metre. I know not all farms have soil that's a metre deep, but wherever they can drill down to, we take this wide core out, divide the core into different horizons. So it's 0 to 15 centimetres, 15 to 30 centimetres, 30 to 60 centimetres, and if there's anything left, 60 plus. And then look at the soil organic carbon in those different horizons of the soil core. And that tells us not only how much carbon is there in total, but actually where is the carbon? And then when we go back, it's quite interesting to see if management or anything has impacted not only the total amount of carbon, but where is it? Has it gone deeper, perhaps deeper rooting crops or tree planting, or, all sorts of things could have impacted carbon actually moving further down the profile. So it's some quite interesting technology that we're using specifically to achieve the aims of the project.
Very much so. And how far does the calculation go? Let's say you're looking at a beef unit that's reading stores. Is the transport and getting those stores to market, is that involved? I've never known how far this sort of calculation goes.
So that's a question about the carbon calculator, and that is to farm gate, as far as I understand. So it's all the operations on the farm to produce the product that leaves the farm gate.
That makes sense. With a focus on carbon reduction, what's the long-term goal for us as agriculture in the UK? What's our target? I don't actually know who I'm asking this to. Whoever wants to jump in, I'll let you guys go for that. But what is our target as UK agriculture?
I'll go first, Bruce, and you can correct me in terms of
Excellent.
Scotland. But in terms of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, then those governments have set a target to be at net zero by 2050. Now, I think that target is 2045 for Scotland, so that's even sooner. But it's important to understand what net zero is. So net zero isn't no emissions. That is where emissions, it's where carbon sequestration is taken off the emissions. So you take account of carbon sequestration to get a net balance of emissions. So it's important actually we have good data about carbon sequestration to really understand where farms are in terms of that net zero target, because very often we just talk about emissions, and actually that's not really a fair portrayal of what farmers are. They're land managers. Across the farm landscape, you have important stocks of carbon, as I've talked about: trees, hedges, soil, and we need to take account of that. And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do with our pilot.
Bruce, how does it compare in Scotland?
The target, as Mary said, in Scotland is 2045, and Mary covered it really well there. I think the important thing to remember is that we're talking about net zero, which is about creating a balance between what we emit as an industry, because like every other industry in the world, we emit greenhouse gases through the process of producing, healthy, nutritious food. So what we are trying to do is basically play our part as an industry across the UK and across the world, really. But with a Scottish focus on it, we're aware very much that the biggest greenhouse gas that comes from livestock production in particular, which is, obviously QMS's remit, the biggest greenhouse gas emissions output is from methane. And methane generally comes from enteric fermentation. So basically burps and farts from cows, from sheep, from pigs. Not so much from pigs. Pigs is generally from slurry. But what we're talking about is providing a way to balance that enteric fermentation that you can't really do without. If you've got livestock, you're always going to have methane. The way to think about it is major businesses, take EasyJet for example, or other airlines are available, but take EasyJet for an example. They will offset their carbon because they don't have the ability to inset greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So they'll offset by buying a patch of land, by investing in ecosystem services elsewhere, whereas farms have the ability to inset, to reduce their balance down to a more net zero figure or closer to net zero by providing those services, those greenhouse gas services, removing carbon from the atmosphere by using the soil, by using the permanent grassland, the trees, the vegetation on farm. And that's really what this project is doing, is understanding what that balance sheet looks like, because it's effectively an environmental profit loss. It's the same as a profit loss in a business.
For sure, yeah. And here, if there's any airlines out that want to sponsor the podcast, get in touch. But Bruce, I almost wanted to ask you after what Mary said. We're aware of Wales, Northern Ireland, England. 2050 is the target in very Scottish fashion. You've got an egg, we've got a Scotch egg. You've got sellotape, we've got Scotch tape. We're
Yeah.
gonna push it five years ahead. Is that exciting or is that concerning from your perspective?
I think to put an optimistic spin on it, I think it's brought the target into plain view, and it's given everybody a bit of an extra incentive because you know what these things are like. It's a challenge to get there. It's a challenge to reduce our environmental output impact, I should say, and bringing that target forward gives everybody a little bit of extra momentum, a bit of extra impetus to work towards this goal. So it's easier to get buy-in and collaboration from the wider industry, from producers. They understand that, red meat has to play its part, livestock agriculture has to play its part. It's important that we do that together, and having that deadline slightly brought forward gives everybody a bit more of an incentive, I suppose.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've never seen targets as a target to hit. It's like a thing to keep pushing forward. If you're constantly hitting targets, you could argue they're not good enough. That's certainly the way
Yeah.
I've always looked at them. So yeah, no, I think so. I've got a question for you, Mary, but just before jumping back, one thing on the calculators, I guess, because I know people listening are asking me to ask this question. It's a really hard question to answer, but it'd be interesting to see sort of how you process it. How accurate are the calculations, are the estimations of the calculator, whichever terms we're using? I assume that's been increasing over the course of the last couple of decades, but how can we quantify that?
Well, it's important to understand that all the calculators are based on sort of a framework that is best practice for carbon calculators. So I'm talking about IPCC, so the International Panel for Climate Change, define how you calculate certain things and the factors that you use. So there are limitations to the science that we can't pick up all the nuances of everything that's going on a farm. And I know farmers get frustrated about that. But the carbon calculators are doing their best to keep up to date with the science, but there are quite strict rules about how much evidence you have to have before you can start taking account of certain practices on farm, because we want it to be accurate, or as accurate as the science allows us. So at best they are a good estimate of what you're doing, and they're trying to reflect fairly across all these different farms what is the emissions. But there are limitations, we know that, but I think instead of sort of focusing on the actual one number at the end, the thing is to use it as a tool to say, well, how can I change? And if I change certain things, how will that impact my emissions or my sequestration? And use it as a tool to inform what you're going to focus on this time and see how that impacts. Because we know lots of things will impact your carbon footprint and you have absolutely no control over that. So it can be disheartening if 1 year your carbon footprint actually goes up and actually you feel you've done a better job, but it was a drought season or whatever, your yields were poor. But so it's very much a direction of travel over time and not just a one number, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that point about regulation is very important. It's not just willy-nilly throwing numbers out. We have to hit certain targets from a regulatory perspective. Is extremely valuable because I didn't know that until, God, 4 or 5 months ago, to be fair, when I was speaking to someone who works for a carbon calculator. And I think that's a really important bit of information for those that I know wanted me to ask that question to hear. Bruce, you mentioned the sort of network, maybe network's not the word, but correct me if I'm wrong, of 170 farms involved. Can you give us some insights from discussions with those farmers, maybe discussions around this project as a whole? Is there anything you can share, or is that still quite quiet? What can we hear?
So yeah, I can give you a bit of insight from certainly the Scottish perspective. So we had some very good meetings earlier on this year, and I should caveat this by we're very lucky in Scotland that we're a relatively well-connected, very small agricultural sector, and we managed to get all of our 35 farmers in a room or in 2 rooms earlier on this year, and I had some great conversations with them talking about the project and what they hope to get out of the project. And I think, Mary will agree, she was at the meetings as well, that the positivity in those rooms was astonishing. Everyone's fully bought into this project, fully bought into the process. At the moment, I've got a WhatsApp group of all the farmers in my phone, and it's busily tinging away with, shared stories about best practice, about impact. There's an open day tomorrow that some of the farmers will be going down to on one of the farms that's taking part. He's a strategic dairy farm, so that'll be an exciting visit for a lot of the livestock guys that maybe don't have that much interaction with the cereals side, the cereal farms or the dairy farms. It's a great opportunity to network and to talk about how the environmental impact has so many shared facets across the industry, regardless of which sector you're in. So it's creating a network in itself, and I'm sure it will be doing the same in England and Wales as well. It'll be creating that network of people with a shared outlook, with shared ambition, that are all taking part in this project for the good of the industry. Going back to that piece where we're all rowing in the same direction, it can only make us stronger.
Getting 35 people from across, as you say, Scotland's not massive, but still, that's bloody good going, to be fair. Is a big part of this also almost creating like that sort of environment that's not just you're all doing the same thing? Is that WhatsApp group quite cohesive, or are you working to try and create that environment as well? Because I assume you don't get 35 without that.
Well, no, that's right. And I think what we want to do is make sure, very much like the Monitor Farm program, you want to make sure that the farmers that are taking part in this process, this project, are going to get something out of it, or they're going to value what they do get out of it, rather than just passing on raw data. We're going to allow them to discuss amongst themselves best practice, how it's impacted their business. And we're already seeing that in the WhatsApp group. And I know that's a sort of, it's not a very academic example, but they're already exchanging stories about when the soil sampling was done on their unit and how it's impacted them, and the best way to do, to manage grassland, to manage soils, to manage carbon audits, to manage consultants and things like that. That's all coming through that WhatsApp group because they've got this shared interest. So we're putting people together through this project, and the fact that they've all got the project in common is just one aspect of it.
For sure, yeah, and I think you said, it's not very academic. I think that's how these things start. I found when I went into my Nuffield scholarship, I thought it was going to be all like these groundbreaking discussions and everything had to change straight away. But it's having a chat and Mary and I having a chat and realizing, oh, wait a minute, I could learn that, or vice versa. And then, yeah, the academia is going to come, but you've sort of got to work out what works for you. With a focus on the ground, I guess, Bruce, what does this mean for those 170 farmers practically? What are they getting? What are they giving as well? Probably quite important. And you touched on best practice there. What's the focus from an industry perspective while looking at best practice? Did that make sense?
Yeah. So on the ground, what these guys are going to get is an understanding of how what they do on the farm, to the farm, around the farm, affects their greenhouse gas emissions and affects their sequestration and storage of greenhouse gases. So what they're going to get is an understanding that, this grass type maybe has an advantage over this grass type. If you want to do that, they're going to get an understanding that, certain types of grazing, certain types of nutrition are complementary or not so good or not so effective. They're going to get a way to share real hands-on practical management data out of this. But ultimately, what we're going to get as an industry is a way to defend the positives of the industry, which we haven't done for a long time because we haven't had the data to back that up. We're lagging behind other industries who manage to get all their ducks in a row and count their greenhouse gas emissions and then, considerably offset them, whether it's Shell or like aforementioned airlines. They've managed to offset their carbon by just using money. Now, farming is not an industry where a lot of people have a lot of disposable cash. The advantage we have is that we have the option to inset. So understanding how best to do that as a farm business is going to be a huge advantage to these guys.
And just one quick question on the farms before we move on, Bruce. Is that 170 or 35 for Scotland? Is that fluid, or is that these people have signed up for a duration of time?
Yeah, as Mary said, this is an environmental baselining project. So it's about gathering that baseline across these farms and to follow that journey through and understand what interventions on farm and what management practices on farm affect that greenhouse gas net balance. You need to keep the same farm. So it'll be the same farm throughout the process. But then after that, we should have a standard way of measuring greenhouse gas emissions and sequestration, which will be really exciting.
Yeah, 100%. And looking forward, Mary, AHDB has a role in policy. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't exactly know exactly how it works. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Maybe I have said the wrong thing. Certainly a voice for us as farming, and feel free to correct what I've said there. how is this data going to work on a political level? You know, are we gonna work with policy? Are we gonna work with maybe even investment in the sector? What's the changes going to be, or potential hope changes?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because government are definitely interested in what we're doing. It's quite novel to do this on the scale that we are doing it. Um, and we're already talking to them about the benefits of things like a national LiDAR program. Now, I think they're just about to start such a thing in Scotland, but we want to encourage them to do that across England and Wales as well. I've done it in the past, but it's actually getting it on a regular basis. So actually, we could have a regular assessment of above ground carbon on not only farms actually, but it's quite useful across the wider landscape in terms of what the country's trying to achieve in terms of net zero. So there were things like that we're definitely having conversations with government about, and just how that they can support farmers in terms of moving to net zero and also adapting to climate change as well, because you know farmers are suffering the effects of climate change quite severely in terms of their business. This year is a good example in terms of a drought across the country, and then there'll be a wet season, and it's quite obvious that the extremes of weather that they're having to deal with is having a massive impact on their business. But actually they can be part of the solution as well. They can actually do a lot of things to build resilience into their business. And some of that will have multiple benefits in terms of building soil carbon, potentially improving soil health, reducing runoff and improving water quality. Very often, once you start doing one thing, there are multiple benefits from that. So I think that's quite interesting. And looking at farms as not just an area where you produce food, but there's hedges, there's woods. It's an area of land that actually brings a lot more benefit than just producing the crops in the cropped area. There's lots of other land there that has lots of other ecosystem services to offer. So for me, it's about looking at farms in quite a different way and appreciating all that they could bring to everything that climate change is throwing at us, really.
You mentioned ecosystem services right at the point at the end there, Mary, and it was just on the tip of my tongue. Is we talk about carbon sequestration, looking at sustainability from a carbon perspective often, and one of the things that I felt for a while that was missed out of that conversation that is definitely now, to use the pun, creeping into narrative is biodiversity. It seems like that's involved here. It's not just solely looking at the absolute of carbon. It's also looking at that bigger picture. Is that involved at an objective level, or are we just considering that we're seeing better biodiversity on farms as well?
It's certainly something that we're looking at. Assessing biodiversity is not easy to do holistically. We've had a look at a number of options for doing that, and often there's sort of snapshots of different species or different habitat, and it's difficult to get a picture of that farm over a year across the whole area. So it's something, as I said, that we're looking at. We love to build it in because we think that's a really important part of the ecosystem services that farms are providing. But we haven't quite found the right way to do that yet. So no promises, but we're certainly exploring it.
Yeah, and I was quite aware there wouldn't be promises on that. We were in the position where we would have been with carbon 15 years ago on that in that regard. If we're having this chat in 2040, we'll probably be saying what we're saying about biodiversity in line with what we're saying about carbon today, and that's what this whole progression is about. Bruce, looking at it on a global scale, how are we how is this project running in line with what we want from a UN perspective, looking at SDGs, looking at obviously net zero sits at the forefront of it, but how is that running in line with those plans?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a global challenge. We've got a global impetus to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's something that the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the UNFAO, have pointed out a number of times with a number of studies recently. one thing to understand is the context behind this, and we have a growing population. Globally, we're looking to hit 9 billion people, and that's a lot of mouths to feed. So fundamentally, you have to be able to produce protein somewhere to feed these people, to keep people living. And when you look at the statistics, the UNFAO have done an examination as to how effectively, environmentally, you can produce protein. So if you look at the kilograms of carbon dioxide that is emitted when you produce a kilo of protein, there are places that take 350 kilos of carbon for every kilo of protein they produce. Now, if you look at the other end of that spectrum, that's where you'll find the UK. We're less than 100 kilos of carbon per kilogram of edible protein. So if you're looking to produce edible protein, the UK is generally one of the most effective places to do it from an environmental perspective, because we have this network of well-established semi-permanent, permanent habitats, and mixed species swards, grasses, livestock that grow really well, crops that grow well in parts of the UK. So we're one of the places that is best suited to produce edible protein into the future.
That's quite a stark figure. What's
It
that,
really is.
0.3 over the average? 0.3 of the average, sorry. Wow.
Yeah. It's quite staggering. And I mean, the UNFAO actually went further, and they identified in a report that came out in 2023 or 24, they sort of identified the key ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from livestock production. And one of the four most effective ways is by utilizing grassland better to improve carbon sequestration, which is obviously one of the things that we hope to learn out of this program. So it's been identified not just by us because we're doing the program, but by the UN as one of the key ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from livestock production and continue producing great quality protein.
Is a large part of that as well that the extensity at which we run a lot of our systems, maybe more focus in Scotland with that statement, North England. I assume that's got to play a part, or am I barking up the wrong tree there?
No, it's probably a number of different factors, but that's definitely one of them. Is that the permanent grassland? Scotland is 85% permanent pasture, 85% less favoured area, and our permanent pasture is up in the 60-70% of our grassland. So we've got a lot of permanent grass that's never ploughed up, that's never turned over, that's never tilled. So that carbon sits in that soil, until the end of time. So that's part of it. The other part of it is the fact that we are almost unusual as a livestock sector, because we are 70% beef production and 30% dairy production, whereas the rest of Europe is almost the other way around, where it's 70% dairy. And what we've got there is animals that grow faster, that grow better, that convert feed and forage much more effectively. So that saves on the efficiency side of things. So there's less greenhouse gas emissions from the lifetime of that animal. So it's a multifactorial thing. But yeah, certainly the hills and glens that we are so famous for are definitely a contributing factor.
You've mentioned our main large ruminants there, Bruce, with dairy and beef cattle. What role, purely asking this because of the QMS involvement in the Monitor Farm programme, what about that sheep side?
Yeah, I mean, sheep are exactly the same. So the UN work goes into livestock agriculture, so it's focused on ruminants and monogastrics like pigs as well. So it really encompasses every species. I think sheep as well. We've got a good commercial sheep sector, and again, if you look at where the sheep are, you'll generally find they are the ones that are utilising that ground that isn't available for crop production or fruit production. They're the ones that are using that permanent grassland, and they're creating a rich diversity of habitats up there as well. So sheep stand to play a very important role into the future with producing protein. And as well as that, there's a huge amount of, not to put too much of a QMS spin on it, but there's a huge opportunity for developing countries who want sheep protein, who want sheep meat there as well in Scotland, and the UK stands in a really good position to produce that for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Mary, a minute or two ago, I had the scary realization that a mere 15 years ago away is 2040. If we're looking at sort of, I guess, slightly long-term plans of this end game of this project, if we were to sit here in 15 years, what would you want to be sitting, being able to say this is the results we found?
Yeah, well, building carbon is a slow process. So the initial term of this project is 5 years. And most of the data collection is going to take part in year one, certainly in terms of LiDAR and soil sampling. We will do a carbon audit in years 1, year 3, and year 5 to kind of give the farmers a chance to agree an action plan, implement some changes and then monitor the impact of those changes in years 3 and 5. But what I'd love to do, and I don't have the money at the moment secured, is to then obviously go back in year 5, 6 and LiDAR those farms again and take soil samples again, because obviously that ground truthing data that we could get would be really valuable in terms of really assessing the change that's been made over that time. And obviously if we could do it again and again, that would be even better. Because as I say, change is slow in terms of carbon, building carbon. So you just need to give it time to see that effect.
I totally understand the answer to this might be, I'm not telling you that, Wallace, but you mentioned you don't have money for whatever it might be. How much does this project cost? Is it an expensive project, or is it where does it sit?
Yeah, it's several million. So it is an expensive project, particularly the soil sampling work. Doing it how we're doing it is expensive. Put together, it's a big, expensive piece of work. So, all the sectors across AHDB have contributed, as have QMS. But it is a lot of levy payer money. So we're keen to get as much value out of it as possible. And what we're actually doing as part of the pilot is looking at the opportunity of new technologies to potentially assess maybe soil carbon, maybe other things. So I'm thinking of satellite data, other remote sensing technologies. So that might reduce the intensity of the sampling that we'd need to do next time, because we could supplement it with some other remote sensing data. And actually, I think that's what is exciting, that actually over that time period, technology will have moved on and there will be other ways of doing this other than driving in and taking a soil sample. We'll need to do some of that, I expect, but there may be ways we can at least make it cheaper, which I think would help.
Yeah, and I think we often, I guess people are probably listening to that, and my comment to it was that money seems worthwhile to me. If you were to speak to someone in farming 20, 30 years ago, the best way to add value would be processing a milk into a yogurt or whatever, poorer quality meats into sausages, for example. But I think our best way of adding value now is at that staple level, creating a sustainable product. It's becoming more and more marketable. It's pretty much Bruce's job, and I truly think that's where we're really adding value. I feel like you were going to say something, Bruce.
I was just going to come in on what Mary said, what you've covered there as well, just to add my tuppence worth. I think a lot of the time as levy boards, as AHDB and QMS, we shy away from telling people how much projects cost. But I think on this one, it's not a project cost, it's an investment. I think that we should be shouting, and we do shout from the rooftops about how much we're investing in this project. A figure I like to throw around is that it works out to about £28,500 per farm that's involved, the work that's being done on farm, and that's not given to the farmers. That's invested in understanding how their businesses work on an environmental aspect. So it's an investment. It's a massive investment, but we're doing this for the future of the industry.
And for those listening, Bruce, that are not one of the 170, that are maybe thinking, oh God, this is interesting. How would they go about engaging in this project, and should they?
Yeah, I mean, the second part of that question is a no-brainer. They absolutely should. We would love everyone that's involved in agriculture in the UK to get involved with this project in whatever way they feel they want to, because this is for everyone. This isn't for those 170 farms. It's not for Mary and I. It's not for our teams, our boards. It's not for individual stakeholders. This is for everybody. This is for Agriculture PLC. So yeah, if everyone hears a little bit about it, we'll have achieved what we want to achieve. We want to get people to come to, when we get to the point of talking about the results, about the data that comes forth, we want to get people on farm. We want to communicate that. We want to be open and upfront with the data that's coming out and what it means for the wider industry, because ultimately this is a way to defend agriculture from any negative voices in the future.
Guys, one of the things we sort of try to do as we draw these episodes to close is signposting. Where can people look to have a look at this? They've just listened to to 50 odd minutes on us chatting about it, but is there more information? And I'm going to guess that's going to differ from QMS and AHDB's perspective. So purely because I've just spoke to you, Bruce, is there anything to look at from a QMS perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of information in the WhatsApp groups, but on a more public side of things, yeah, we're certainly hopeful to keep sharing information, keep sharing, what's happening with the project. Anytime we get updates, anytime we have, open days, for example, tomorrow there's an open day. As we're recording this, at one of the baselining farms where they're opening their gates to talk about their own farm system, their economic farm system, but also going to be talking through their experience so far in the baselining work. And that's something we hope to continue on. And that'll all be signposted through QMS and HDB as well, I imagine.
Please don't try and turn up to that farm walk because it has now happened when you're listening to this.
Absolutely.
Mary, from an AHDB perspective?
Yeah, well, very similar. I mean, we've got a website, so if you Google AHDB baselining, I'm sure you'll find the website, and we do try and keep that up to date in terms of sort of technical information about the project. We're also planning a number of events. I think sort of spring next year, there'll be open events, not just for the farmers. So we'll hopefully have some initial results as well to share at that stage. So that will be quite interesting.
Well, both. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. This is the last episode of the second series of Field Talk, the Monitor Farm Scotland podcast. So yeah, we'll see you for the third series. I'm excited. You're probably going to hear from me in a second or two, which will give you a wee bit more information about the next series, but we shall see you for the next one. See you then. Well, that is a wrap for Series 2 of Field Talk, where we focused on our innovation projects and brought together 10 insightful episodes showcasing the ingenuity, resilience and forward-thinking approaches of Scottish farmers and rural professionals. From virtual collars to enhancing grazing management, finding that point at which output can be optimised and utilising digital tools, each episode has highlighted real-world solutions currently in use across the Monitor Farm Scotland programme. However, don't get too sad. We do have Series 3 coming, which will delve into some of the most sensitive and impactful topics in farming families, succession planning, management transitions and communications across generations. These episodes will explore the emotional, financial and practical dimensions of handing over the reins with real stories and expert insights. To complement the series, the Monitor Farm Scotland are hosting 3 in-person workshops with Family Farm Coach titled Discussing the Undiscussable. These events will provide a safe and supportive space to tackle the conversations that often go unspoken in farming families. So, the dates for your diary: in the north, the 3rd of November at Mansfield Hotel in Elgin; in the west, the 5th of November, which will not be hard to remember, at the Radstone Hotel in Lark Hall; and in the east, the 7th of November at the Rast Pavilion at Ingliston. So, whether you're navigating succession now or planning for the future, these workshops are designed to help families build understanding, trust and clarity. More information can be found at the Monitor Farm Scotland website. And as the host, I look forward to seeing you listening to the next series. See you then.
Thanks for tuning in to the Monitor Farm Scotland podcast. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you get your podcast from for more episodes as we continue to dive into the stories from our Monitor farms. If you want to stay updated with our latest news and events, please visit the Monitor Farm Scotland website and follow us on social media for more updates and keep in the know about what our farms are getting up to. Monitor Farm Scotland is funded by Scottish Government and managed by Quality Meat Scotland and AHDB.